This is the intro to Blender for asset building tutorial. So I intend for this sort of to be like a basic tutorial for people who haven't necessarily used Blender before or want to use Blender. It's kind of very relevant, especially when people want to work with 3D projects to understand how to modify assets or build assets. But for the most part, people get by just kind of making their own thing or like using other assets that they buy. But it's very nice to be able to like modify your own thing or build your own thing within Blender, which is kind of what I'm hoping to try to teach this today. So Blender is a very deep program, so we'll start off just kind of with intro to what is Blender. So as you're probably aware, Blender is a free open source 3D software. It's developed by the Blender Foundation, which is quartered in Amsterdam and the Netherlands. Started in 2002, and it's become one of the largest 3D softwares in the world. So what can it do? Basically, it can do a lot of things. It's a very large scale, hi, come on in. It's a very large scale program. You can do a lot within it. It can do stuff like edit meshes, animate meshes, create textures, render final results, as well as actually edit final videos. You can even do stuff like video effects. It has a completely built out video editor too, so not a lot of people use it for video editing, but it is technically possible to do that as well. It's similar to After Effects in that way. And that integrates really well with some of the 3D aspects. So it's very versatile, but when you approach it for the first time, it can really feel overwhelming. I started out with it in 2014. So when I started out with it, I was like, oh God, this is such a huge program, so much to do. And learning it really took a long time. So that's why, the question really is, how do I start? Where do I begin with this program? So let's just kind of jump right in. I know some people are still coming in, so if you have not yet downloaded Blender, feel free to do that. The first little basic parts are going to not be necessary to have Blender, though it will be nice to have it open. And I recommend, like I said, if you have a mouse, to use that as well, just because it makes it a lot easier to navigate around. So let's jump right into Blender. I have it open right here. This is what you'll be presented when you first open Blender with the newest version, which is the splash screen of Blender, which will show you this kind of showing. Actually, the first time you open it, it'll ask you a couple of questions. I assume you've probably downloaded and opened it before. It'll ask you some questions about like what you want your inputs to be. Those aren't super important, but just kind of go with the defaults for the time being, and you'll be able to kind of work to better understand it as you go. So let me open up where my notes are here to start out. And real quick before we get into the nitty-gritty, could we just raise some hands if this is like people's first time using Blender? Like complete for the first time, yeah. Okay, and then everybody else like a couple times, sort of just want to get to know it. Okay, cool, yeah. So, as I said, let me just take a look at my notes here. So, Blender can do quite a lot, and that's very overwhelming to start with. So, like, this is what you see to start with, and then, for the beginner, your mind is overwhelmed with all this information about what are all these things? What is this? What is all this stuff? But the first thing you can see is a cube. And I think it's best to start with navigation in the environment, because it's very easy to become overwhelmed with everything else, but the first thing you have to do is know how to look around. So if you have a mouse, like I said, it's very helpful, but it's not technically required. Trackpads do work, but they're a little bit tough. If you've worked with something like Unreal or other stuff, this operates a little differently. You use the center of your mouse to pivot around the screen. So you grab in a position in the workflow and then pivot around so you can look around. And then I'll just be talking about how to use a mouse, so if you don't have one, I'll mention that after. But middle mouse, you can move around, you zoom in and out with the scroll wheel, and if you press Shift and then middle mouse, that's how you pan around. And then you can also hold Alt and then middle mouse and direction to snap to certain directions. Getting used to this and kind of just like working with the environment is kind of key to getting quick with this and getting good at like moving around and understanding where you're at. But that kind of just comes with time. So if you just have a trackpad, what you can also do is use this little section up here to do pretty much the same thing with panning, and then I think you can also go into the preferences and add in navigation. Where is it? I'm sorry, I did not check where this is. I think it's in, mouse, emulate 3-button mouse. And what that does is if you can have a middle mouse button on a trackpad by using Alt and then left. So it would just be by pressing Alt and then clicking. That's similar to having a middle mouse button, but with a trackpad. So that's what I recommend. There's also emulate numpad, but we'll get into that later. So yeah, this is the add-on section, and what that does is, okay, I guess you have to install the whole thing. Never mind, I thought that was native. So what it is it offers a list of different add-ons. I don't really recommend getting too deep into this section until you know what you're doing. But it does offer a lot of cool things that aren't necessarily exposed on launch, and it's they're sent in the Blender version that you download. You can also download different add-ons from different developers that do really fun, cool things that make your workflows faster. But again, I don't recommend that off the inherently. So again, sorry I can't show you what the shortcuts are, but you'll just have to try to remember them. Shift and then tilde, which is the little squiggly at the top left of your keyboard. That activates fly mode, which is very similar to what you've seen probably in Unreal and so on, where WSAD allows you to walk around, E raises you up, Q lowers you, space zooms. It's kind of more like a trackball in and out, and then you can also press Shift to move a lot faster around the space. So that's one way to work. I tend not to do that myself just because it's kind of annoying to bounce back and forth, and I'm much more comfortable moving around like this. But it is one thing you can do if that's the workflow you prefer, or if you're having a hard time getting into somewhere and looking at something. That's one way to look around. So
how do you turn off fly mode?
you just click. Just click, yeah, mouse click. So another thing that's very helpful is if you just press the tilde key, it'll expose this thing, which is different views. And what that allows you to do is look at parametric views, top view, left view, right view, and then front, as well as all the other angles. So the nice thing about that is that it allows you to see a orthographic view of your screen, of what you're looking at. And what orthographic view is different slightly than perspective view. It's kind of hard to explain, but what orthographic view does is it removes any sort of perspective. So if I was looking at a wall, even if I was looking at the wall over there, it would still look as flat as the wall directly in front of me. So that can help you with editing your objects if you're trying to model it against something, but it's important to know that it's not going to look correct if you go back to perspective mode. So that can kind of ruin certain editing stuff. So that allows you to move around. And then if you go back and forth from orthographic, so again, this is the front view, and you can see there's no perspective. But if I just press the middle mouse button, it changes it back to perspective. So you can see kind of the difference between front, this is front, and then if I just click the middle mouse button, it'll change it back to perspective. So you can see I can look around it, whereas with orthographic, it's going to be just this. I can never see the sides of the thing. So that's important to know. It helps to model. Mouse pan, middle mouse, zoom in and out. Yeah. Let me know if I'm going too fast, if you guys have any questions, by the way. I want to make, yeah.
How do you toggle that?
Oh, toggle what? This part right here?
No, the top, left, right.
You press the little. It's like it's like a squiggly button on the top left. It's called the tilde. I assume. Yeah. Yeah. Key. So this is the tilde key. Tilde. Sorry. It's this button right here. You might not have it, but it's the one that's under escape. I don't know if your keyboard's different, but that should bring it up. Did you get it?
Is it the same for Mac?
I assume it is. Yeah. So another thing you can do if you want, which is a workflow that I used for a little while, but you can also go into Edit, and this is what I was talking about earlier, which is under Navigation. I'm sorry, under Input. emulate numpad. And so what that does is technically if you also have a numpad, like with, I think, Dave, do you have a numpad on that computer?
No.
Okay, so if you have a keyboard that has a numpad on it, which is like the little extended keyboard section, you can also press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and that will bring you into those different perspectives as well. But if you don't have a numpad because you're on a laptop like we all are, emulate numpad, what that does is it says like, okay, now that top line of numbers is going to be a numpad as opposed to having an actual numpad. So if I have that, I can press 1 and then I'm in front, 3 is the side, 5 brings me back into perspective, 7's top, 9 is bottom. And then you can also press Control 1, and then in the case of Mac users, it's Command 1. That will be the opposite side. So like this is the front, and then this is the back. And if you want, you can also click any of these. Again, like if you don't have these options, you can also press any of these little doodles on the little widget at the top, and that'll do the exact same thing.
Is there a shortcut? You might have said this, a shortcut to just get you back to how it was when you opened it, like with the head, like how it is
Just
right
like
now?
this, yeah. So if you want to just get back to a default one, you can just go File, New, and then General, and then don't save, and that'll bring it all back. You won't ever necessarily need to do that for navigation. There are some weird glitches where you might zoom in too much and then it feels weird, but there are ways to fix that, which I might cover but might not just for the sake of time. If you ever find yourself uncomfortably close to something and feeling like you can't move around, there's a way to reset your perspective to kind of remove that as a problem. So that allows you to like walk around your scene, think about the ways that you're looking at things in different ways. And that's the core of sort of the movement aspects of Blender, which are very important, I think, for working with it. So basically, that's what we've got in here, but there's still quite a lot to look at with Blender. Hey Zoe, welcome. It's, there's a lot still here. So we'll just take a look at what's available in this section. So Blender is basically broken up into several different like interface modes, because like I said, it's a very deep program. There are also the ability to do a lot of different things. So this is the 3D layout landscape, and it offers you the ability to edit within an object space and an editor space. There are also a bunch of different things that you can change to, like an image editor, UV editor, compositor, animation timeline, even going as far as like a text editor and script console so that you can write your own scripts or implement your own scripts, and then a bunch of other stuff that we're not going to get into for the basics. So this is what you're going to be mostly working with just for building assets. There's also the texturing workflow, which we'll get into later. But even within certain like layout mode or certain modes, which is to say, or certain workspaces, editor types is what they call it. So certain editor types have different things within them. So this is object mode. Object mode, edit mode, sculpt mode, and then these other things which are less relevant. And that can really be confusing because it's sort of overwhelming to think about the different layers of how these things interact. But just to start out, don't worry about anything other than object mode and edit mode, just for mesh building. So what exactly is the difference between object mode and edit mode? Give me one sec. This thing keeps turning off on me. Object mode, edit mode, and then maybe sculpt mode are basically the things that directly modify meshes. And to give some information of what a mesh is, it's basically just any collection of vertices which make up lines, which then make up faces. And a mesh can technically also just be a line. It can also be a point. And then there are also things called curves, which I might talk about later, but again, is its own thing. So the main modes, like I said, that you'll be working with in the for this is basically the object mode and the edit mode. So object mode is the mode that we start out in. And what object mode is you can think about it like each object has components. And those components are basically the vertices and the lines and the faces that exist within the object itself. So if you press Tab, that'll bring you into edit mode. And that mode will be just editing directly one object. And that'll show you the different vertices, as well as the lines, as well as the faces that make up this box, which is what you start off with. And the difference between object mode and edit mode is that in object mode, you can only modify the object within certain parameters, but you can't edit the individual vertices, edges, and faces. So that's the important distinction, is that you can kind of think about object mode more like a layout mode, as opposed to the more detailed building and structuring of the shape within edit mode. So the thing about object mode is you have certain ways to affect your boxes. You've got movement, which you can do with G. These are very important hotkeys. So you've got G for movement, and that'll allow you to move around freely. You've got scale, which scales up and down on every axis, as well as R, which is rotate. If you're used to something like Maya or even Unreal, it's QWER. You can change that, but it's, this is what Blender does. So G, I kind of remembered as like go. So if I want to go from one thing to another, I do that. R, obviously rotate, and scale obviously is scale. But if you want to lock where you're scale or where you're moving on something, because say I want to move this over here precisely, and if I'm in this perspective and I move this over, it looks like I moved it over just on the X, right? But if I, let's try like this. So if I want to move it like this. So it looks like I moved it just on the X, but I also moved it on the Z as well as on the Y a little bit. So just free moving is very unreliable because you're moving based off of your perspective. So if you want to do that where you're just moving it on one axis, you press G, and then you press the three different axes, which are Z, which is up and down, X, which is left and right, and then Y, which is forward and backwards. And then if you want to move on everything but one axis, you press Shift and then the axis that you want to move. So I just press Shift Z, and now I can move on every axis except for the Z. So I can be assured that it's not going to go in the Z axis. And that works with all the other axes as well. And that also works with scale. So if I want to scale just on the Z, I can press Z and scale on the Z or the X, and then so on and so forth, and with the rotate as well. So you get the idea. And that is very useful and important because when I was getting started, I didn't really realize that, and it's very easy to get things unaligned. And when you get into unaligned territory, it gets very complicated and kind of hard to fix, and very frustrating too. So remember to try to lock to the XYZ coordinate plane as if that's what you're doing. So let's see. So I'm jumping ahead of myself here. Management interface, edit mode. So now that we've got object mode understood, how do we add an object? So that's a very important thing. If you want to have something that's not a box, how do you add it? The answer is Shift A, and Shift A brings up a very large menu which has the option to add a bunch of stuff that might be kind of overwhelming, like meshes, curves, surfaces, metaballs, blah, blah, blah. For now, like I said, just focus on mesh, and then even probably just stick to plane, cube, UV sphere, and then cylinder. Those are the main ones you need to worry about, and then maybe monkey, because monkey's fun. But we'll build, can someone give me something to build just for reference so we can all work towards it? Any kind of thing you want to think about? Any coffee mug, wonderful thing. So if you think about a coffee mug, it's kind of cylindrical, so you probably want to start out with the cylinder. So you go Shift A, actually first you probably want to get rid of this. And a weird hotkey, but one that's very important, is delete. In Blender is X. So that is pretty much delete for everything, which is weird because it's also an axis, so it can be very confusing. But if you want to delete something, click on it, press X, and that'll delete it. And then Shift A to add the next object, which if you think about it, a cylinder, kind of like a mug, we'll make a cylinder to start with. So we've got a nice cylinder, and if you look at this little bottom section here, it's kind of hiding, which is annoying because it's very important. But in the bottom left, you've got a little thing that shows you all the different initial parameters for what you just added. And the moment you click off, those parameters are lost. So you have to add it again if you wanted to actually start from that perspective. So I'll do that again with Shift A. Click on the cylinder, and then now we see here on the bottom left, there's a little parameter section. So you can change stuff like the vertices. You can see now I've got just a pentagon. If I want to have a 30-sided cube, I can do that. We'll start with, let's see, 16 good? That would be 12.
Is there any reason why you wouldn't go super, super high on the vertices?
Yeah, so I'll talk about understanding vertex count later on, and then especially with building a very base asset. So For building assets, you want to start out very low because you'll be adding information to it later and adding density to it later. So you want to start out very basic. Like you can even go as basic as saying like 12. So I'll start with 12. You don't have to, but you can start with 12. So you also at the top here, this is one thing that's kind of important. It says cap fill type, Ngon. You want to change that to triangle fan for the most part. What that means is if you press Z, you can bring up different shader options. And what that'll do is you can look at material preview. Currently, there are no materials on this besides the default one, so it doesn't show anything interesting, as well as wireframe. And what that'll show is the line breakdown of whatever you're building. So if you have an Ngon, you can see there are no vertices or nothing on the top. It's just a flat Ngon. And what an Ngon describes is basically a polygon or a quad with an n number of sides, which is to say it can be anything from like 5 onwards to an infinite number technically. But if you add triangle fan, you can see here. I'll show you the difference again. Ngon and then triangle fan. What that does is it brings it to a point at the center, and that will allow us to work with it a little bit easier. It's not always the right option, but in this case, we'll go with it. So pressing Z, I can go back to solid, and now I've got a cute little cylinder that we can work with. So like I said earlier, now we have an object, but we can't. Yes?
You made it Ngon or triangle?
Triangle fan. Both will work, but they're just different workflows. So now we've got an object, but like other than scaling it and so on, I can't give it an arm unless I want to add another arm and then do all that nonsense. So what do? I go into edit mode, which is by selecting the object I want to edit and then pressing tab. Or you can go up here and press edit mode. Or if you want to be extra fancy, you can even go control tab, and then that'll bring up a whole panel of different options. But again, that's probably unnecessary at the moment. Just go with edit mode. So now we've got the ability to, hey Serge, now I've got the ability to work with the piece that we actually built earlier. And as you can see, we've got the ability to edit both the vertices, the lines, and the faces. So, why would you want to work with one thing over another? Why wouldn't I want to just say, okay, I want to work just with vertices? And now that I selected all these vertices, if I press G, I can scale, I can move them all around, I can scale them even on different axes, I can rotate them just like you can with an entire object. The exact same things apply. Why would I want to work with something like a vertex as opposed to working with the lines? And I'm real quick going to swap back to preferences, turn off emulate numpad. And if I turn off emulate numpad, the reason I did that is because now I can select 1, 2, 3. I can select the different selection options. In the top left, it shows the vertex select, edge select, and face select. So let's just... I turned off emulate numpad, which is what I turned on earlier for quick like field changes, so I can look at something from the front. I turn that off because if it's off by default, now I can change, and you can see it right here. If I press 1, it goes to vertex select, which was already selected. 2, I can select edges, and then 3, I can select faces, which allows for me to quickly hop back between them. And you can see also on the mesh when I do that, certain things change. So like now,
What are the keys for that?
the keys are 1, 2, 3. So if you want, 1, 2, 3. It should select those. Yep. So and you can see here like now the vertices are visible. And you can see that, right? So then now if I press 2, I'm in edge mode, and then 3, I'm in face mode. So now I can select faces, etc. And then if I want to just have vertices, I can do that. So let's start making our mug here. So what does a mug look like? It looks basically like a cylinder with a compressed hole on the inside. So I will take all of these faces up on top, because if I want to build something with like a hole, I got to build the hole in. So there's a couple different ways to select, and that's an important thing to talk about before we move on. There's the default selection up here is in the select box, and there's a whole list of tools here. Basically, you can do everything without using hotkeys. If I wanted to move, I could select here, go into Move Tool and then move back and forth and so on. But that's very slow, so I do recommend trying to learn the hotkeys. But there's the select box, which allows you to just go like this and select everything. There's also the select circle box, which can also be accessed by pressing C. And then there's a select lasso, which does this, which I think you can also do by, I forget the hotkey for it, to be honest. But I just generally work with select box. It's the easiest thing. It's the fastest thing. If you want to specifically select stuff, like I said, you can press C, and that'll create a little circle box where you can drag over what you're doing, and it'll select everything. And you can also use the scroll wheel to make it bigger or smaller, depending on how much detail you need. And this, yes?
Is there any way to know how many faces or vertices have been selected? These are pop-out.
Yes, there is. So this isn't actually available by default. You have to go into Edit, Preferences, what is it? Layout, I think. Navigation. Interface. Menus. I forget where it is. It's in here somewhere. Status bar. Yeah. I'm sorry. So it's an interface, status bar, scene statistics. And what that does is it gives you an information about all of the different faces, what you've got selected, vertices, et cetera, which is very nice if you're doing high density editing, because then you'll know how many polygons you have. And even for like later on, it'll be helpful, but not entirely necessary for the moment. So what was I saying? Yes, so an important thing also to know is that by default, your selection is not, does not X-ray. So if, for instance, I go here by pressing the tilde button and I go front, now I've got the front view of this thing. And if I want to select everything, the whole thing, just by dragging, you'd think by dragging out, from this view, I've selected everything. But if you go back into perspective mode, you can see that both the top as well as the bottom and the back haven't been selected because they weren't part of the selection. And there's a couple different ways to address that. You can quickly select or be able to select everything by pressing a Z and then going into wireframe mode and then just selecting everything. And then you'll be able to see through and select everything. And there's also up in options over here, I'm sorry, not options. This little button right here, toggle X-ray, I've got it set to Alt-Z, but I don't think that there is actually a default hotkey for it. And by the way, if you ever want to set a hotkey, pretty much anything you can right-click on and then just change shortcut, and that'll allow you to write your own hotkey for it. It's important not to overwrite hotkeys, but it's not hugely detrimental. You can always reset them. So even in the default mode, if I click this, it'll allow me to go into X-ray and select stuff through, which is very helpful because sometimes you want to get stuff behind it and not. Another very important thing to know is by pressing A, you'll be able to select everything. And then select A, which selects everything, is very helpful if you're trying to move everything within edit mode. So now on to the next step of making our little cup here. So I can press C and select all of these. I can just drag select, or I can even individually shift click everything and select it bit by bit, which is very tedious but sometimes necessary. So what I'll do next is I'll press, this is the first actual mesh editing we'll be doing, which is pressing I. And what I does is it allows you to inset faces. It's best to inset faces which are flat, and it's hard to inset faces if they're on different planes, but we'll talk about that later. So basically you can inset only inside. What that does is it's basically like an extrude, but an extrude on a plane that can only go in. So you can scale it to, you can also turn boundary off by pressing B, and I think that'll, actually never mind. But you can also see in the top, sometimes it's at the top, sometimes it's at the bottom. There's other information that directly tells you about what you're doing. Oh yeah, I'm going through, and I can I'm basically scaling in on itself, which can happen, and that's a problem.
How did you do that? How did you get the circles inside?
You select the faces and then you press I. So this section up here, the thickness, all these informations, they're very helpful. And they will give you, if you press something weird and it changes what you expect it to do, you can look at that and then you can imagine that that's probably where something might change. So for instance, if I press I again, what that'll do is put individual face inset. So that's very useful if you want to make something like a bunch of windows on a building. You can select a bunch of faces and then press I, and then it'll just build it in. So if I wanted to make something like a futuristic like space revolver, barrel. I could say like, that, and then that's what it looks like. So, but I don't want that. I want just a mug. So I press I, and then I click.
How'd you go between the individual face holes and then this big?
You double tap I. So again, if you press I,
Yeah.
the selection modifier here, individual, is not selected. If I press it again, it turns that on, and now then I'm doing the same thing where I'm individually selecting them, or individually scaling them on the
You just
inside.
press it again.
Yep,
and it
it
turns
toggles
on.
it right on back.
Got it.
So then I click, and then if I want to move something, if I want to extrude something, and extruding is another very important hotkey, remember, which is E. And what extruding does is it allows you to take a face and then literally bring it out. You've probably seen it before in other programs if you've touched 3D before, but it allows you to go basically extend that space outwards. So by default, extrude locks to Z, which is nice because usually you do want to extrude on the Z. But if you don't want to extrude on the Z, if you want to extrude on the X, you can. That's going to look weird. Or if you want to extrude on the Y, same thing. So we'll lock it with Z, and we'll just kind of push it down there until it looks kind of good. And if I want to check where exactly it is within my cup, again, I can hop back by pressing Z into wireframe. And that'll allow me to see within my cup, this is where I ended up. And if I want to move it down a little more, adjust it, I can press G and then shift to like really fine adjust. Yes? So again, if you want to get the menu for the wireframe, you press Z, and then that'll allow you to look at all the different ones. You can
I
also
can't do that while.
You can't do it while you're extruding.
no, you have to do it after, or before, after or before. Thank you. So for reference as to what that question was, what's your name, by the way?
My name,
Kenna, right. So what she was doing was pressing G, and then what that does, the difference is that it's moving the entire face as opposed to extruding. What extruding does is it adds an extra set of lines and vertices to actually change the direction or like allow you to move further. So again, if you are frustrated that you can't see exactly where you're going, you can always just extrude a little bit and then modify it later by selecting it and then modifying it into where you want to go. So now we've got basically a cup. This is a cup, and it works fine for anything. You could export this as an FBX, and you've got yourself a cup. But obviously, we don't just want a cup, we want a mug. And a mug requires handles. So this is going to be a little complicated, but basically what I want to do is start extruding from a perspective of it. But the way that I made this, I have a 16-sided face, and I can't actually extrude on any of these because I want to. You want to work on axes, and what I mean by that is if I wanted to extrude this, I'm just going to do some quick stuff which I haven't explained yet. But basically, if I wanted to do this, like I could do it like this, but G and then R. But the issue is, like, now that I've got this off to a side and it's on an angle, I can't, if I wanted to rotate this plane, even if I line it up pretty perfectly, extrude, rotate, extrude. This is crude as hell, but you kind of get the idea. If I look back at it, it's going to be all ganked up because the way that I'm doing it is the rotation's weird. So
How do you create loops?
I'll talk about that in a sec. Like I said, I'm kind of jumping ahead. So the framework of what I'm trying to say is you want to be modeling on locked axes, usually X and Y or Z. In that way, it prevents things from getting out of alignment and then tilted weirdly. And that's why when you press the tilde key and then do front, you'll be able to actually modify these things easily. Now, because these faces aren't directly aligned, I could go from top and then select everything with A and then rotate it so that it's directly aligned by doing exactly 15 degrees, which is geographic or the correct amount of rotation to do this. And then that works. That's a fine way to do it. And then I can add my loops and then extrude it that way. Or I can also do it where I just flatten the planes out here, which I'll talk about in a second. So the next thing, which is very important for building meshes, is if you want to add lines in here, there's a couple different ways to do that. So there's Control R, which is add edge loops. And what edge loops are basically loops which are added data which take the flow of your model. It interprets the flow, and that's sort of its own problem. But and then adds loops around that flow. So for reference, like this is, it interprets this particular piece here as its own flow going from here all the way around. And then when it adds it, you can see it goes to here. It doesn't go all the way down to the bottom section right here, that bottom vertices, because the flow is broken, which is, it's a topology thing, which can be very confusing, but is something you have to kind of get used to. I won't explain that at the moment, but know that it will come up, and if you have problems with topology, that's probably why. And the reason that's happening is because this is a triangle, and most modeling softwares don't really like triangles. They allow them to exist, and they sometimes even make them as part of like some generative processes. But for modeling alone, you want to try to make everything as a quad, which is a four-point polygon. And that allows for things like this edge flow to happily wrap all the way around. So if I press Control R, again, that's Control R, it'll allow you to add a edge loop. And you can also use the scroll wheel to add multiple edge loops, which is very nice if you want to have, like, if I wanted to, for some reason, make this a zebra cup. I can do that and then scale on everything with the Z and so make it a little zebra cup. So if you want to have that, that's a fun little way to do that easily. But for this, we won't be doing that. We'll be adding an edge loop going up here, and then adding another one and just kind of putting it up here. And you slide up and down, and it should slide on the relative edge that it's been assumed is correct. And I'll also add one right here and one right here. And my advice would be, if you want it to be centered directly in what you're doing, press Control R, left click, and then right click. So right clicking will center it back to the middle no matter what. If you press Control R, left click, and then you move it a little bit off and then press left click again, that's how you set that. So if you want it to be offset, left click is what you want. If you want it to be directly centered, you press right click. So that allows you to have a cute little starting point right here, which is the basis of what we'll be doing. So we'll also actually, what?
How do you make it stay on center and have a vertical line?
Yeah, so if you want it to be, so if you have a vertical line, you just kind of have to move it back to where, you kind of just have to like look around for where it'll assume the point is. So like this is where I'd add a line through this thing, but I can also find the center point there for that. So you just kind of have to like move your mouse around until you see where the appropriate line center that you want is. So I'll do another one at the bottom, but this time what I'm going to do is a little fun little trick where I'm going to have two of them. I'm going to slide them down, and then because we're working on the same axis, we're going to press scale and then on Z. And what that's going to do is it's going to scale them together. So because I'm scaling together, it will move them to the center point. And then I can press G and then Z, and that means I can move them up and down. I can.
Is there a way to make it like a mirror of the top one?
Pardon?
You know what I mean? So like we have the two cuts on the upper half. Is there a way to mirror that on the bottom half?
There is technically a way to directly mirror it with a modifier, but we're going to get into modifiers a little bit later. For the moment, just kind of do it manually, yeah. So, yep.
Why don't you make the two? Like, how do you have the two selected at the same time?
So if you want to have more than one thing selected, you go into the appropriate mode. So if I want to select more than one vertice, I can click on it and then press Shift, and Shift clicking allows you to select multiple things. And then if you want to select loops, this is a very important thing. If you want to select loops, which are these long like connections of vertices, you press Alt, Alt and then click. And that'll allow you to select an entire edge loop. So you can see here I'm selecting this loop, that loop, that loop, this loop, that loop, and then very easily you can click and shift click and then select multiple loops. And that's a very important thing to know, is that Alt clicking allows you to select an entire edge loop. So
what's the purpose of selecting a loop? Like, what can I do with that?
You can modify it. So I'll get into how so like if I, for instance, say I wanted to change where this is. Now that I've got two loops, I can change down here, and now I can say like, okay, now if I want to move these two things out, I can do that. And if I wanted to change back where these were, I could click this. That's going to change. So the flow is broken here by this other line, but basically now I can change where those points are. So it's
How'd you select it how'd you move it?
How'd you move it? Yeah, after you selected it, how do you move it?
It's just the same thing as with any object or with any other modification. You've got, yep, it's G, G, and then on an axis, R for rotation, scale for scale. Same thing. So GR and S.
How did you take the two lines and the edge loops and then like shrunk them together?
So like I said, it's a little bit more of a complex thing, but if you select an entire loop, you can press scale, and then that'll select those two things to scale, and then if you press Z, it'll scale together on the Z axis. You can also scale together on like the X axis, etc., but I wouldn't recommend that because it's going to look bad. Yeah. Doop. So if I wanted to re-add, like I did with my fancy little method, where I go Shift R or Control R, which is to add an edge loop, add two edge loops, and then slide them down here. They're going to maintain their distance with the slide. So it only happens after you click, where you can press scale and then Z. And what that's going to do is bring them together because they're scaling. This is kind of a confusing thing that I maybe should mention earlier. If you press the period button, also the right arrow button, it brings up the origin point of where your stuff is being modified. And basically what it allows you to see is median point, active element, bounding box center, individual origins, and 3D cursor. So mostly it's best to keep it at median point, but sometimes it might be best to swap to individual origins. And what that does is basically it's looking at where the reference point for where you should be modifying your vertices is. So this little doobler in the center is called the 3D cursor. It's like a weird thing that Blender has. It's this little arrow here, which kind of looks like a very thin life jacket or life preserver. So if I change this to 3D cursor and then I press scale and then Z, you can see that now they're scaling pretty much the same, and they're not scaling the same way as before because they're relationally connected to the 3D cursor. So that's just one thing to keep in mind for later down the road when you need to do more like complex movements. But for the moment, just keep individual median points. So that's taking the median point of two different things that you have selected, and then saying that's the point we should scale everything from or rotate everything from. So for reference, like you can see, the median point of these two is the point where it's being rotated. So the center of it is where it's being rotated. If you do individual origins, and then I scale on the Z, nothing's going to happen because each of those selected loops, which are their own things, are going to be just trying to scale on the Z in relationship to themselves, so they won't have any actual modification. So this is getting a little bit too heady, which is why I didn't really talk about it. For the most part, keep it at median point. If something goes weird, or if you need to change something, that's the section to do that. It's again, the period button as well as the right arrow button. So, any other questions? Yes?
Yeah, so kind of like sort of this question, but is there a way to measure between 2 points?
Like how far?
Yeah, so like say for example the top, those two loops, and I measure the distance in between.
You can. There is a measurement add-on over here called Measure. I wouldn't necessarily recommend even doing this unless you're trying to do like real-world scale stuff. But it does allow you to say, like, I can connect, if I press Alt, I can connect to a vertice and another vertice, a vertice, and I drag and I do another vertice. I can see that's 0.29 meters. And then here, from here to here, it's 0.123. So I can change that so it'll be between the two.
Match up.
Yeah. But again, that's not entirely important in my opinion.
I was just doing like, are you talking about like spacing them out evenly?
Yeah,
I would do it in like a graphic so that you can have the grid
Yeah.
behind you,
and then map it up to the
Yeah.
grid.
and then align your loop with, like click the Y.
So yeah, this is actually pretty helpful. Orthographic So basically, yeah, we'll take this. We'll take. That's a terrible picture. So it's good to start when you start modeling to use references. It's very good actually. So let's go side. Like finding an object you want to reference and then say like object and then side view usually gets you a pretty good side view image. And if it's a small enough picture, it's not that big of a deal. So let's put that here. That's a fucking WebP. I can't use WebPs. This one's fun. So yeah, we'll go with this. So this is a cute little mug, not great. God damn it, WebP. I can't use WebPs.
This screenshot.
Yeah, I know. At this point, this next one, if it's a WebP, I'm gonna just screenshot it.
Oh, there you go. That one.
Nobody else has that problem but me.
Yeah, I know. I can't. WebPs are so annoying. Okay, so one way to go to. So this is sort of its own thing, which I wasn't going to necessarily do, but we can do it this way. So if you want to have a reference image, what you do is you go front view, you go Shift A, and then you go down to Image, and then Reference. And then that allows you to literally go into your desktop, Hobbies, and then, yeah, Shift A, which is how you add stuff, and then go down to Image, and then Reference. And then that'll load in a reference image, which you can then modify. I'll scale it down to be like kind of approximately the size here. And so,
Oh, do
Yeah.
we need to go back to object mode?
yeah, you do need to go into object mode. So
Okay.
again, you can add, this is an important detail, which is good that you asked. You can add objects into an edit mode object. So like if I wanted to add another cylinder in here, I can do that. But, so GEX, so like this is, what the hell is that nonsense? So this is another cylinder inside of this other cylinder, but they're now the same object. So you can see that they're the same thing. So if I wanted to add like another component inside of it, that's how you do that. So now that I have a reference image, it was like, what's the point for that? You can slide it back on the y-axis, and then click it, and then now when you go into front view, and then go into wireframe, you can see now like, okay, this is what we're working with. So I'll kind of try to align this a little better and maybe just kind of scale it so it's accurate to what we've been working with for the most part. And then move it back and forth with scale and X. And then I'll go in here into this object and then just scale it on the Z so it's a little bit closer. Or scale it, move it, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, that's pretty accurate looking. And then I'll go back into edit mode and then go on the front. And okay, so this wasn't exactly where I expected it to be, so what I'll do is I'll take this edge loop here and then raise it up to this spot right here, take this little edge loop, raise it up to here, take this little edge loop, raise it back up to here, and this one down to here. And it's kind of like a fun way to kind of like, it's sort of like a paint by numbers thing, which is why this is how I kind of got my start, which is just thinking about random things, relatively easy objects to model and then doing that, which is good, especially if you're trying to get into asset building, to be able to kind of have a reference point to look at. So everybody got to that point? All good? No questions with that? Okay, cool. So now if I want to make this little goobler here, what do I do? What you would do, in my opinion, would you'd take these little sections, and again, you can select vertices, you can also select edges, but if you want to extrude faces, always use the select to face mode. So again, go and select these little bits right here, and then now that you've got that, you can go back into the front mode so that your extrusion isn't weird, and then just press E and just kind of walk it out to here. Now you'll notice, because what I did was I was extruding from an angled face, that the resulting extrusion itself has this little bit of angle in it. And that's, fine maybe, but it's not exactly what we want. So how do we do that? How do we change it back to just being a flat face? So these faces will be flat. There are a couple ways to do that. You can select both of these, and because we're working on planes, like I said, or working on axes, like I said, you can press Scale, X, and then 0. And what that'll do is it'll scale all the things on the center, because we're still in median mode. It'll take everything and average it out to 0. So that's one way to flatten it. There's also the concept of snapping, which we'll talk about right now, which is this little button up on the top where it looks like a magnet. You can also toggle it by pressing Shift-Tab, which if you ever accidentally start having weird things happen, that's probably why you've got the snapping mode on. And what snapping mode allows you to do is basically take whatever you're selecting and then move it to a specific position, so specified by other things. So it has a bunch of different things with increment, vertex, edge, face, volume, etc. We'll do it to vertex. So I will say, okay, if I want to take this edge here and then move it so that it's the same position as here, which again is good because we're working on axes, so we don't have to worry about weird geometry or like weird math. You just you turn this on, you press G, and then you lock it to X, and then you just select the vertex that you want to select, and you'll see that little dot allows you to know where you're actually selected to. So that's the thing I'm referencing. And then you can click here again, G, Y, and then G, X, and then now it's flat. So both of those options work. Sometimes one's better than the other. If you're not working on axes, it's best to kind of work with this. But it's really up to what your preference is. So now that I've gotten this flat, I'll turn that off again. I'll reselect these faces. I'll go front, and then I'll just kind of rotate it down, G, and then extrude again. So rotate, G, extrude, rotate, G, extrude, rotate. Oop, it's kind of locked in. Just have some weird, sometimes because how Blender works, where you can see like my cursor's looping back on itself, it's wrapping back. It can get confused about like what the actual rotation should be. So just right click, which will cancel out of the selection, or you can always left click and then just undo. So, and everybody knows the undo, right? Which is Control Z. Everybody, that should be locked into your brain for sure. So yeah, just kind of go into wireframe mode and move everything around to kind of like approximate what the look is. And then, okay, now that I've got a basic outline of what a mug looks like, it looks kind of okay, but it doesn't look great. And if I want to go back and tweak it up a little bit, I can go back into front view, add edge loops by pressing Control R, and then clicking. And now you see that because this is another weird thing about this, but because this is referencing this as an edge loop position, it's offset very slightly, which you can see like this is further forward than this and that and so on. So that's not really what we want. So again, we'll do this where we just go here and then press it on snapping X to that, and then for you snapping X to this, and then that's now a flat basically outcome. So that's making sense for folks, right? Anybody who's having any questions?
I'm pretty far behind.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. If you guys, again, if you have any questions, sorry, just ask me, please. Like
Okay, so I think that I didn't end up making the handle behind because I missed how to accurately align the line to the X or Y axis.
Okay. Which line do you mean? The this line right here? This one right here?
The line that's where we were extruding the handle from.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
And I didn't align that to the one of those axes, so if I was to look at it from the front view, then I wouldn't be able to extrude it.
I got you. Okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and hide this, and then I'll just add another one, and real quick break that in. So for reference, if you want, this is kind of the speed view to get to where we were. I'm scaling, I'm moving to kind of give me the semi-accurate representation. I'll go back into shaded view, go into edit mode, take all these little things here, boop, boop, boop. Again, I for inset, E to extrude downwards, wireframe to see exactly where we are, G to move it down to the bottom, and then back into solid mode. And then the part that you were having a problem with was getting this aligned, right? This little section, if I add two of these, one here, and then one here. You were having a problem with keeping these aligned, right?
The wall aligned with the X or Y axis.
I see.
Oh, so,
Yeah, so what I did was, like I said, you can take the whole thing and rotate it on the Z by 15, and that'll make it so that like I'm working on the flat axis. Or what you can do is take this, add 2 loops here, one in the center of this section right here, and then one in the section of this center right here, and then that leaves us with this little double section for the handle, right? Have you gotten to that point?
Oh, okay, I didn't add the second loop,
That's fine.
Control R.
Yep, and then right click so it's centered, or left click and then right click so that it's built and then centered. And then now you've got this little thing here that you don't necessarily know, like if you press E, it'll extrude on its local Z, on its normal, which is not something we'll talk about, but it extrudes outwards, and then you can scale it either by pressing S with those faces selected, X, and then 0, and that'll flatten it, or you can go into the snapping mode, click on snapping, select the 2 different
Wait, which button is the extrude on its local axis?
that would be E. Yeah, E for extrude. Very important to remember that. Yeah. E for extrude, not hard to forget. So we got, we can take these 2 pieces, two edges, and then if I have snapping turned on, I can press G for move, and then now I'm free moving. I press X to lock it on the X axis, and then I hover over one of the vertices that I want to snap it to, and now it'll be locked to this particular vertice set. Okay?
the other way of doing it, scale and pressing 0.
Scale, so yes, but it's scale, and then you have to define what the axis you want to scale it on is. So scale X, and then 0. You can also scale 0 on Y, or scale 0 on Z, which if you look, will completely smush it on the Z axis, as well as scale on the Y axis, which will smush it all the way down on the Y axis. But because we're trying to flatten it out on the X axis, we use the X axis. So that's my preferred method. It's much faster, but it might not be as precise necessarily. There's a lot of shaking heads going on. Is everybody okay?
Just one more time with the non-scale method. What was
Yep. So non-scale method, what you do is you take,
And go back to the snap, making sure my snap.
yeah, so the snap section, like I said, it's up here. And what it does is this button right here toggles it on and off. You can also use Shift Tab if you want. And what that does is it allows you to snap to whatever thing that you want to select. So vertices, edges, faces, etc. We'll just use vertex for the moment. So you go here, make sure you're selected vertex, turn on the magnet button right here, and then now you're in snapping mode. So you make sure that you're selecting the edges by pressing this or by pressing 2, selecting both of these edges by shift clicking them, and then moving them, basically, or physically moving them by pressing G, and then you keep it on the x-axis by pressing X, and then now you can reference that particular vertex that you want to snap to just by hovering over it, and then left-clicking will allow you to lock that in. So everything will be locked at that point. Remake it. One thing that you're going to run into, one thing you're going to run into a lot, which is really annoying, like incredibly annoying, and everybody should listen to this because you're going to run into this hundreds of times until you get used to it. Before you're comfortable knowing what button clicks do what, you're going to end up having a lot of overlapping faces or overlapping vertices. And I noticed this when I was walking around where people are making erroneous clicks, which happens, and I used to do this all the time, where essentially what happens is it creates an extrusion or something which you don't realize. And then it can fuck with you later. So for reference, like, does it look like I do anything different between this and this? Like, does my mesh look different between these two things?
Yes.
Okay, shut up. It doesn't. It kind of does, like somewhat noticeable, and it's obvious I'm kind of giving you a clue that something happened here. But this looks like it's just a normal mesh for the most part. It looks okay. But what happened was I actually added erroneously, I extruded, but I didn't give that extrusion any depth. So what I did was I basically gave an extra layer on top of an already existing mesh. And what that does is it means that now I have something inside of the thing itself, which you select if you want to do that, you select everything and then press E, and then that'll just extrude everything. Or it can also happen where like now you can see like I might not notice this, but now I have an entire mesh hiding inside of the mesh itself, which is going to really mess things up later. Mesh things up. There you go. A plus. And that can happen even just with something where like you extrude, you didn't realize like, oops, whatever, and you don't realize that anything's different because it doesn't really look that different. But again, there's a whole other copy of this mesh inside. So two ways to fix that, and a thing that you might consider having on as a beginner is this thing in the top right called auto merge vertices. And what that does is it allows you to, whenever you make a movement, basically reset those vertices. So if I match a vertice, and it won't cascade to already existing overlapping vertices, but
Turn that on?
this little section right here, yeah, little kissy mouth.
I don't know if I have that.
So you should.
Are you in edit?
It's in edit mode.
Goddamn.
Yeah. So to keep in mind that is in edit mode. So if, however, you already have a mesh where there are overlapping vertices, a very easy way to fix it is select everything with A in edit mode, press M, which is merge, and then press by distance. So for reference here, I will make this a busted mesh. So like I said, did it work even? It did. It didn't. So A, E, click. So now, shit, isn't it? Oh, okay. So because I have this on, that's going to prevent that from happening. Auto merge vertices is going to prevent that from actually happening. So I can't even do that thing where I make the overlapping mesh. So I'll turn that off, everything, E, and now I've got a busted mesh. So if I already have one and I forgot to turn this on, or if you're dealing with this now, and I want to get rid of the fact that there's overlapping vertices, what I do is I select everything, M, and then collapse by distance. And what this does is it allows it starts with a very small merge distance, which means literally overlapping vertices. So if you had an especially large amount of those, that might ruin a little bit of your mesh, which can be a problem. But it is best to make sure that you do that. And even with like the most basic thing, that can happen pretty frequently. But if you, for instance, want to delete some, imagine I wanted to poke a hole in this and just get rid of this. I'd press X, and then I'd delete faces, which is the brute force method where it deletes everything. If I wanted to just delete the vertices, I can also do that, and it'll delete everything in relationship to it. So this vertice is gone. That means this line is also included. This vertice is gone. This line is included. Everything that's connected to the vertice. And then if I want to just get rid of the edges, it'll do the same thing, except that it's going to maintain the edges that weren't deleted. So it's very confusing. Usually I just deal with delete faces because you kind of know what you're going to get with that. There's also dissolve, which is useful. If, for instance, I added an erroneous edge loop here that I don't want, we're talking about deletion. If I added an edge loop here I don't want, what I do is I can press X and then dissolve. So what dissolve does is instead of, if I just do a standard edge delete, you can see it's going to delete everything as well. So I got rid of the edge I didn't want, but it deleted everything else as well. So what dissolve does is it just deletes the thing itself. So dissolve edges, you can see it's gone. I don't have to worry about that. So if you want to get rid of selections, things that you're selecting, press select everything and then get rid of it with X, and then face is usually what I'd recommend. Sometimes you don't want to do that, or sometimes that's not what you want, but that's the best way to get rid of stuff. Hockey is if for instance I mess up, I delete these faces, and I'm left with just a hole. One way you can fill it, there's a number of different ways, but one of the faster, or one of the ways to do it is by selecting 4 vertices and then pressing F. And what that does is it fills. So 4 vertices and then F to fill. It's a good way to plug holes or fix things. You can also do it with like multiple vertices. So for instance, if I get rid of this edge here, and then I select all of these and then press F, it'll fill it, but you can see here that there no longer is an edge here, because it tries to make an n-gon out of the selected things that you've selected. So that might not always be the best thing, which is why I recommend always just go through and select 4 for the time being. There are other methods, of course, to do that quickly, but that's one of the fastest things. And like you can see here, it made a triangle. So if I want to have a triangle here, 2 triangles. But that's also another way where you can get into trouble with overlapping faces, because now I've got both I guess maybe it overwrote it, but point being, you can get into trouble with doing that pretty easily. So I don't necessarily recommend doing that. Just try not to make any mistakes, you won't have to fix them. That's my best advice.
Favorite.
Could you show us the rotation again outside of?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
So what do you mean exactly?
So like once we have the flattened faces, like when I'm extruding and
Oh yeah,
rotating on the
yeah.
edges.
So yeah, everybody just get to this point. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get to the next section, but I want to make sure everybody's on the same page.
Are there snaps?
Yes, there are snaps. We talked about snaps earlier. It is this little section, snacks or snaps?
Snaps.
Snaps. It's this section up here. You can snap to increments, vertexes, edges, faces, and so on. We're all in the same place here, right?
Yeah.
So if you guys want to just look up here real quick, because it is important that you pay attention to this particular thing, because I saw this happening when you guys were trying to do this on your own. Like I said earlier, if you're trying to do rotations by perspective and you're not locking them to a specific axis when you do them, it's going to be rotating by perspective. So you can lock to an axis by either being in a perspective which is orthographic, which is by using the tilde key and going into this particular perspective. Like now here, when I look at the front, any movements or any rotations that I do, you good? Any rotations that I do in this perspective, front, any rotations that I do in this perspective, because I'm in orthographic, which means I have no perspective, they're going to be on the y-axis. So because you can see here, I'm looking directly down the y-axis in infinity with 0 perspective. So any rotation I do, you can consider it to be equal to being on the y-axis. Even when I'm in orthographic view, I often still lock it to y regardless, because I don't want to be making mistakes where something gets out of alignment. And again, that's why you have to work on axes, because if I was, for instance, I rotate this a little bit like this, and then I go into, I want to rotate this on the y-axis, it's going to get all crooked and fucked up, so you can't use that. So that's why you need to work on axes, or try to think about working on axes. It's definitely a very helpful way of working, and it saves you a lot of time and effort adjusting stuff later. So we'll go into front mode. We'll go into wireframe mode, and then turn this little section on. If you don't see it all the way through, you have to press toggle X-ray. So I will go and select the lines here by clicking on the line button, shift and alt clicking on this little doobler here, as well as these top lines.
The line as well as the top of the handle.
Yeah, I mean, it's best to have done this beforehand so you don't have to go back and select all this extra nonsense, but if you didn't, then that's the way to do it. And then go back to front view, GZ, move it up to this section, and then the same thing with all this stuff. You
This
select.
is just for resizing.
Just for getting.
We don't care about the size, we don't have to do that.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, you don't get. Yeah, if you don't care where it is.
I don't wanna bend my hand off.
Yeah, if you don't give a shit about that, don't worry about it. But so yeah, so assuming we don't give a shit.
Are you doing?
Assuming you don't care about that and you just want to go off of this, because this is pretty much accurate enough, you can go into solid mode so you have a little bit of a better view. Go into face mode, select these two little faces here so that we have them selected, and then go back into front view. So again, you can either model it directly against it if you want to have a reference, or you can kind of freehand it out in here, as long as you're always locked to an axis. So if I extrude with E, it's going to be going along its Z, and then its local Z, which is not the same thing as the world Z, so it's very different. And then if I rotate, I can rotate like this, but I want to be sure that I'm rotating on the Y. So again, and this is related to which axis that you're working on. It might not necessarily be the Y, it might be the X. But if you're working on the X, then that means that you're also, if you're extruding along the X, you want to be rotating on the Y because it's the one that's running against it. So now I can rotate it down, and then
How are you rotating the face?
what Anon was asking is sometimes when you rotate, it's going to look like your face is collapsing in on itself, which it can happen. You can see it's getting all fucky because it's confused about how to render it. So you don't want to you want to be careful not to over extrude stuff. But even if that happens, you can still fix it just by like taking these two edges and then moving them down. So now we've got like this little piece here which we can extrude. So whatever works, but just make sure that the geometry maintains some level of fidelity.
We should get it so that it points like a full 90 degrees down.
It doesn't have to. No, it's best that you don't actually you don't want to go to 90 degrees or over 90 degrees because if you do, stuff can get very strange. So, like I said, normally you want to have it. You want to have it kind of a little bit different, and then like I said, if you can see here, like because the angle is kind of weird, where this part is over extruded to it's kind of like overextending. You can also just move it down, and then now you've got it moved. So if when you extrude out of a face like this and then rotate, it can kind of look wonky and kind of weird because you've angled it past 90 degrees. But if that happens, just press G and move it down so that it's now like this. So you can see kind of like where, it looks weird right here, it looks fine right here because you're taking this this little angle here and then making it so that it's part of this as opposed to something weird. So put it like here. You can go back into front mode and then extrude. And then at this point, because you're locked onto, if you're in orthographic view or if you're using a lock, like a locked axis, it means that you can kind of just freely walk around, work by extruding, rotating, extruding, rotating, extruding, moving, rotating, extruding, rotating, moving, rotating, extruding, moving. I have snapping on still, and then moving and then rotating. And then now you've kind of got a cup handle, right? Does everybody, I'm sure that you might not be quite so fast, but at that point, when everybody's comfortable, we can kind of continue here. And what I like to do is also just go back through and maybe just move even the selections of vertices so that they're just like a little more accurate to what we were working with scale-wise. And you don't have to be too precise about the way that you align them because you can always add more vertices later or like align it later. You can also do this by scaling, but again, it's weird when you're scaling because when you're scaling, you also have to take into account perspective because scale is by perspective unless you lock it to a specific axis. Actually, I don't know if that's right. For the record, I don't know if that's entirely correct. But if I want to add like a little more detail right here, I can just add a little edge loop and then line it in. Add a little edge loop and line it in. And I'm sorry if this is running long because it was supposed to stop at 4. So if anybody needs to go at any point, I don't blame you.
You picked the vertice icon, right?
Yep.
And then that's what you're adjusting?
I'm currently just adjusting vertices.
Okay.
Just walking around and working on all that. Yep.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you for coming.
How do I know that I'm picking the vertice that's on the side that I'm looking at? Like for example, if I click on something, it pulls it, but it's not picking the side behind it.
No, it is. It should be.
You see what I mean? So for example, if I'm picking that one, how do I know?
Yeah.
which is that one?
So again, you have to be selecting here.
I can't like.
You
I
can't
see,
click.
I see.
So Anand's question was, how do I know that I'm selecting the right thing? And if you're going through here and you're finding that Like I click on one thing, and then I move it, and then it's doing it where it's like only selecting one vertice. You actually have to drag to select. So drag to select through the whole thing.
Delete. Okay, gotcha.
So is everybody at that point? Good? Everybody good? Okay. So this next section is going to be a little confusing maybe, but basically what we're going to do is we're going to add another edge loop, and then just kind of we'll turn snapping back on. Make sure that the edge loop is completely selected. Again, if you want to select an edge loop or any type of loop, you hold down Alt. I think there's not an Alt on Mac, right?
There's option.
Option on Mac. So Option on Mac, and then select that, and then press, as long as you make sure you've got Snap selected, press G, and then Z, and then hover over the top little vertice of the top of your bottom of your mug. And then we'll do that again from the bottom of the mug. We'll click Control R or Option R. What is it? Command Option R
Option. Wait, to make an edge loop or to select?
to make an edge loop.
Oh yeah, then it's Command R.
Command R on Mac. Sorry, I don't know the combos. I should, but Command R and then click again, and then we'll do G, Z, and then just put it right on the bottom of there, and we're good. So now that we've got basically a face that we can align it to, we'll delete the faces that we've made again by pressing 3 or selecting up here on the face mode, selecting these, and pressing X, and then deleting faces. So we've got a nice little spot where we can connect in here.
Why do we want to delete those faces?
I will tell you in a moment. Just follow along.
Okay. I'm following.
Just follow along. So I mentioned this before with the fill option, which is, again, selecting things, multiple vertices, and then pressing F. But basically what we're going to do is walk around these little quad sections and then press F to fill it. Actually, I'm going to do something a little freaking wacky. What is it? It's a bridge. So that's one way to do it.
Oh, what was that?
Yeah, the bridge edge loops, which is
Well, yeah.
yeah. I'll go over that. So so what we can do if you want to be really tedious is walking around and pressing F and then building out the bridges, which is good practice for selecting vertices, but is also incredibly tedious. So everybody's at that point where they can do that, yeah?
Yeah.
Everybody okay?
I'm having a hell of a time selecting my loop, my horizontal loop.
Oh, go back into solid.
Oh yeah, so you're go to solid, yeah. Control, alt, click it. Alt, click.
Alt?
Click.
There you go.
What was the R again?
R is to make.
Control R is to add the
Oh, I
edge loop.
just added a ton of loops.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean that's
So we're trying to close
So-
this up, right?
yeah. So that's one way to do it, where we're walking around here and then we're just building out the edge loops with selecting 4 different vertices with shift click and then pressing F. That's one way to do it. The easier, more professional way to do it is by yeah, exactly. This is actually a Pro Blender workshop. So what you do is you select, if you have 2 facing empty loops that are of the same amount of faces, or I'm sorry, the same amount of edges, what you can do is you can select them, both of them, and then press I think F3. Actually, so it's Control E, or Function E, or sorry, what is? I don't even know what the hell you guys have. Option E or something. Command E. Thank you. Command E, and what that'll do is bring up the edge subtool like selection options, and it allows you to look at a bunch of different things that are related specifically to edges. And one of those things is bridge edge loops. And what bridge edge loops does, as you'll see, is magically make it so that there's a connection between similar edges across each other.
How did you pick all of those edges at the same time? Did you go through and click each of
I
the
didn't.
dots?
What I did, again, if you want to select a large number of edge loops, what you have to do is click Shift, Alt, in your case, what? Friggin' Surge?
Shift option,
Command F. Command F.
Command F.
Sorry, y'all got Max. Command F,
Yeah.
and then Command F, and then I'm sorry. No, not Command F. Command click. So Command click these buttons along with Shift to add them to the next selection. So
Command E to what?
It's-
no, just to walk back what I'm saying. If you want to select all of these loops rapidly, again, you click Command click, and that'll select this entire loop all the way around. Same thing with here. If you're working on a PC, it's
Mine is
Yep.
not doing that. It's option.
I'm sorry, Option click.
Option. Julia, what? Stop that.
You don't know anything. Option click. To clarify, it's Option
We're
click.
not listening to Julia.
So Option click, and then Shift to select the next one. Option click,
And then you said.
and then it's
Command E,
it's Command E.
And then bridge or edge loop.
Bridge edge loops.
Whoa.
Man, look at that. And now you got yourself a mug.
Wow, we did it.
Pro Blender Workshop.
Pro Blender Workshop. So obviously that's like the beginning of what you can do. There's a ton of different things that are possible. What I do later, as a, you know, this is to completely zoom ahead here, but like just to give you some reference for what I'd be doing later on, is I'd be subdividing, smoothing it with different, yeah. So there are these little things called subdivision surface modifiers or modifiers, which allow you to create yeah. So this is why I was telling you should work with, and you can actually do this really easily. If you want to go back into object mode, click on your object and then press, go into this little toolbar here. You can go in this thing that says add modifier, and if you select subdivision surface, it'll smooth it out. And then if your computer can handle it, you can up in the levels viewport, add some different levels to it. Also, you can kind of dial it back and then right click on the object and then press shade smooth, and that'll do shading, not geometry. The shading will be shaded smooth. So yeah, so go back to, yeah, so to go back to the thing itself, there's a little wrench at the right. You click on the wrench after you selected your object, and then go into add modifier and then subdivision surface.
And then the shading.
So the shading is a right click on it and shade smooth.
Wait, add modifier, and which modifier am I doing?
Subdivision surface.
Subdivision. Okay.
Yep.
And then do how many
As many as your computer can handle. pretty much.
render or levels view?
Wait, which one? So,
Which one?
It doesn't.
Which
Just
one am I changing?
levels viewport changes what it is when you're actually looking at it, and then render is what it actually changes for the final result. So if you have like a very large scene, you might want to just do that way.
So 6. Can I do 6? Wow.
You can't. I wouldn't recommend doing 6. So what?
6 looks too.
Yeah. Don't do 6. Dial it back and then right click on it, your object in edit mode, and then do shade smooth. All right. Well, that's pretty much as far as I think we can get. So the nice thing about, like I said, there's obviously more with
I
sub.
sent you my mug, I didn't mean to send it to you, Julia.
There's obviously more you can do with the subdivision modifier, but that's why I was saying it's nice to work with kind of that blocky layout, because it looks like crap until you subdivide it, and then you've got something where it's like, you know, this could if I shaded this could very easily be in a game or an experience or whatever you want. So that's it. There's a lot more complex ways to work with the subdivision modifier. You kind of have to take into account things like edge loops and stuff, but if you, just for like a basic starter thing, this is a very easy way to make stuff. So it's complicated. I can send out some resources for if you want to learn some more stuff about Blender. It takes a really long time to get used to everything, and there's so many weird little things that can go wrong. But yeah, if you just want to make something basic, those are basically the tools to do that. So thank you all so much for coming. I really do appreciate it. Yeah.